The bus dropped me at the intersection of Route 7 and Cemetery Road at 4:38 in the afternoon on October 3rd. I had 2 duffel bags, a sleeping bag strapped to my backpack, and the address Mr. Hewitt had emailed. Hillcrest Memorial Gardens, 1847, Cemetery Road, Shaftesbury, Vermont. The job listing said room and board included, which meant I wouldn't burn through my last paycheck on motels while the bankruptcy paperwork crawled through the courts. Cemetery Road curved uphill through maple and birch, already half stripped by early autumn winds. The blacktop was cracked, patched in places with tar that hadn't quite set. I passed a historical marker about the Bennington battle that I didn't stop to read. After 22 minutes of walking, the trees opened to reveal a low stone wall running along both sides of the road, and beyond it, the cemetery. Hillcrest Memorial Gardens covered maybe 40 acres on a slope that faced west toward the Green Mountains. The oldest section near the road had thin slate headstones leaning at angles, inscriptions worn smooth. Farther up the hill, the stones were granite, newer, arranged in neat rows separated by gravel paths. At the top of the property stood a small brick chapel with a white steeple, and beside it, a 2-story groundskeeper's cottage with peeling yellow paint and a crooked aluminum chimney. I found Mr. Hewitt in the equipment shed behind the cottage. He was 70 or older, stooped, wearing canvas work pants and a wool sweater with holes at both elbows. He looked up from a riding mower with the engine housing open. "You're Ethan Marks," he said. "Yes, sir." "You're early. Bus schedule changed." "Same schedule." I walked from the intersection. He wiped his hands on a rag that might have been red once. "Job starts at sunset. That's in 41 minutes. I'll show you the cottage, give you the keys, go over the sheets. You'll work alone tonight. I'll check in tomorrow at dawn." The cottage had a narrow kitchen, a sitting room with a propane heater, and 2 bedrooms upstairs. Mr. Hewitt pointed me to the smaller bedroom, a twin bed, a dresser, a lamp. The window faced east over the newer section of the cemetery. He handed me a ring with 12 keys, each labeled with masking tape. Chapel, shed, gates, shop 3, office, cottage, basement, utility, restroom, freezer. "You'll lock every gate at sunset," he said. 3 vehicle gates, all along Cemetery Road. Lock them in order, north, center, south. Takes about 11 minutes if you hustle. After that, you stay inside the cottage or the chapel until dawn. If you need to go outside for any reason, you follow the procedures on the sheets. He placed a blue 3-ring binder on the kitchen table. The cover had Groundskeeper protocols typed on a label. "Read it tonight, all of it. Don't skip anything. Don't improvise. If something happens that isn't covered, you radio me on Channel 6. The radio's in the office. You'll do a check-in every hour on the hour from 9 p.m. until 5 a.m. Just say your name and the time. I'll acknowledge. If I don't acknowledge, you follow Section C." "What Section C?" "It's in the binder." Mr. Hewitt walked me through the rest. The chapel had a small office behind the altar with a desk, a filing cabinet, a 2-way radio, and a logbook. I was to note the time of every check-in, every gate locking, every anomaly. The cottage had a landline that only reached his house, 3 miles south. The propane heater worked, but I should keep it low because the tank was half full and the refill truck wouldn't come until November. There were canned goods in the pantry, water in 5-gallon jugs, a first aid kit under the bathroom sink. "Pays $400 a week, cash, plus room and board," he said. "You work sunset to sunrise, 7 days." I come by every morning to check the log and handle daytime work. You don't mow, you don't dig, you don't talk to visitors. You lock the gates and you follow the sheets. Questions. Why does a cemetery need someone overnight? Mr. Hewitt looked at me for a long time. Liability, he said finally. Vandalism, teenagers. You'll understand after you read the binder. He left at 5:37, 18 minutes before sunset. I watched his pickup truck rattle down Cemetery Road and turn south. Then I opened the binder. The first page was titled, Core Operational Guidelines for Evening Groundskeeper. Below that, a list. Core Guidelines. 1. Lock all 3 vehicle gates, north, center, south, within 15 minutes of official sunset. Lock them in the specified order. Do not lock them early. Do not lock them late. If you are delayed, radio the supervisor immediately on Channel 6. 2. Between sunset and sunrise, you may occupy the cottage or the chapel. You may move between them using the gravel path that connects the cottage to the chapel's east door. Do not leave this path. Do not walk among the headstones after dark for any reason. 3. At 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m., 12 a.m., 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and 5 a.m., you will radio the supervisor with your name and the current time. Wait for acknowledgement. Log each check-in in the office logbook with the exact time and the supervisor's acknowledgement phrase. If the supervisor does not acknowledge within 3 minutes, proceed to Section C emergency protocols. 4. The chapel's front door, west facing, must remain locked from sunset to sunrise. Use only the east door when entering or exiting. Do not unlock the front door for any reason, even if someone knocks. 5. If you hear your name called from outside the cottage or chapel, do not answer. Do not go to the window. Do not open the door. Ignore it completely. If the calling persists for more than 12 minutes, note it in the log, but take no other action. 6. The basement door in the cottage is locked with the basement key. Do not open this door between sunset and sunrise. If you hear sounds from the basement, do not investigate. Note the time and duration in the log. 7. Between 2:15 a.m. and 2:47 a.m., you must cover the west-facing window in the cottage sitting room with the blackout curtain hanging beside it. At 2:48 a.m., remove the curtain and secure it with the hooks. Do not look out this window while the curtain is in place. Do not leave the curtain up past 2:48 a.m. 8. If you see a person walking among the headstones after dark, do not approach them. Do not call out. Do not shine a light on them. Observe from inside the cottage or chapel. If the person is wearing a green jacket, remain inside and note the time in the log. If the person is wearing any other color, follow the standard observation protocol in Appendix D. 9. The cemetery has 3 permanently installed floodlights, one at the north gate, one at the chapel, one at the south corner near the old stone wall. These lights are controlled by a timer in the shed and should activate at 7:31 p.m. If any light fails to activate, do not attempt to repair it that night. If all 3 lights fail, proceed immediately to Section C emergency protocols. 10. Do not accept food, notes, or objects passed through the fence by anyone outside the cemetery after dark. If someone places an object on the ground just outside the fence, do not retrieve it. Mark the location in the log and inform the supervisor at dawn. 11. If an animal enters the cemetery after dark, observe its movement. Deer, raccoons, and foxes are common and expected. If an animal moves backward or in perfect circles for more than 90 seconds, Go inside immediately and lock the door. Do not watch it. Note the time and location in the log. 12. The restroom in the chapel, north side, accessible from the office, may be used at any time. The door must remain closed when not in use. If you find the door open and you did not open it, close it without entering. Do not use that restroom for the remainder of the night. Use the cottage bathroom. 13. Channel 6 is reserved for supervisor communication only. Do not use channels 4, 9, or 14 for any reason. If you hear voices on channels 4, 9, or 14, turn the radio back to channel 6 immediately and do not acknowledge what you heard. 14. At 5:51 a.m., you may unlock the 3 gates in reverse order: south, center, north. Do not unlock them earlier. If you are delayed, radio the supervisor. After unlocking, return to the cottage and wait for the supervisor's arrival. I read the list 3 times. Then I checked my phone. 5:41 p.m. Sunset was in 3 minutes. I grabbed the keyring and left the cottage. The gravel path crunched under my boots. The air had turned cold, and the sky was streaked with orange and purple. I could see all 3 gates from the chapel steps: north, center, south, evenly spaced along Cemetery Road. At 5:43 p.m., the sun touched the ridgeline of the green mountains. I walked quickly down the paved access road to the north gate. It was a double gate, wrought iron, 8 feet tall. I found the corresponding key, locked the chain, tested it. The mechanism was smooth. I jogged south along the inside of the stone wall. The center gate was identical. I locked it at 5:48 p.m. The south gate took another 3 minutes to reach. I locked it at 5:51 p.m., 12 minutes after sunset. When I turned back toward the cottage, the floodlights snapped on. One near the north gate, throwing harsh white light across the road. One mounted on the chapel's east wall, illuminating the path to the cottage. One at the south corner, aimed at the old section with the slate headstones. I checked my phone. 7:31 p.m. I walked back up the access road, staying on pavement, not cutting across the grass. The headstones stood in neat rows on either side. Some had small American flags. Some had flowers in metal vases, the petals brown and brittle. I didn't look at the names. I kept my eyes on the path. Back in the cottage, I turned on the propane heater and made coffee on the electric hot plate. I sat at the kitchen table with the binder open. The next section was titled Appendix D, Observation Protocols. It was 7:41 p.m. The protocols were simple. If I saw someone in the cemetery wearing anything other than a green jacket, I was to observe them for no more than 5 minutes. Note their clothing, their direction of movement, whether they made sounds. If they approached the cottage or chapel, I was to lock all doors and turn off all interior lights, except one lamp in the chapel office. I was not to speak to them or make my presence known. If they remained in the cemetery for more than 20 minutes, I was to radio the supervisor on Channel 6 with a brief description. The section on the green jacket was shorter. If I saw someone in a green jacket, I was to stop observing immediately and return to interior spaces. I was not to track their movement or estimate their location. I was to note the time in the log and nothing else. I finished my coffee and walked to the chapel. The east door opened with the chapel key. Inside, the air smelled like old hymnals and floor wax. Rows of wooden pews faced a simple altar. 2 narrow windows on each side, all showing black glass. I found the office door behind the altar. The office was barely 10 feet square. Desk, filing cabinet, radio, logbook. The radio was a Motorola base station, old but maintained. It was already set to channel 6. I tested the microphone. Static, then a carrier wave. I put it back. The logbook was a wide ledger with columns. Date, time, event, details, initials. The last entry was from the previous night, October 2nd, logged by someone with the initials GH9 check-ins, all acknowledged by supervisor. One note at 11:17 p.m. Heard calling from West Side. Ignored per guideline 5. Stopped after 8 minutes. I turned to a fresh page and wrote the date. October 3rd, 8:43 p.m. I returned to the cottage and read Section C. Section C. Emergency protocols. These protocols are only to be used when conditions prevent normal operations. Do not implement these protocols unless specifically instructed to do so by the supervisor or by the failure conditions described below. Failure condition 1. Loss of supervisor acknowledgement. If the supervisor does not acknowledge your radio check-in within 3 minutes, repeat the check-in twice at 2-minute intervals. If there is still no acknowledgement, you are to remain inside the cottage or chapel for the remainder of the night. Do not attempt to leave the property. Do not use the telephone. At dawn, unlock the gates as normal and wait for supervisor arrival. If the supervisor does not arrive by 8 a.m., you may use the telephone to call the number posted beside it. Failure condition 2. Total lighting. Failure if all 3 floodlights fail to activate or if they all extinguish simultaneously. Retrieve the emergency lantern from the shed using the shed key. Do this only if it is before 10 p.m. If it is after 10 p.m., do not leave the cottage or chapel. Light the lantern and place it in the chapel office window facing east. Leave it burning until dawn. Do not use flashlights or portable lights outside. Conduct all remaining check-ins from the chapel office only. Failure condition 3. Severe weather. If wind speed exceeds 40 miles per hour, or if snow accumulation reaches 6 inches, follow the severe weather addendum in Appendix F. This includes modified check-in times and restricted movement protocols. Failure condition border 4. Breach. If someone enters the cemetery after the gates are locked, observe them from inside only. Do not confront. Do not call out. If they attempt to enter the cottage or chapel, move to the opposite structure using the gravel path. If they pursue, lock yourself in the chapel office and remain there until dawn. Do not engage for any reason. I closed the binder. It was 8:57 p.m. I walked back to the chapel, unlocked the east door, and sat at the desk in the office. The radio's clock read 8:59. I waited. At exactly 9 p.m., I keyed the microphone. "This is Ethan Marks. Time is 9 p.m. 3 seconds of static, then Mr. Hewitt's voice, dry and faint. Acknowledged, 9 p.m. I logged it, 9 p.m., check-in. Acknowledged by supervisor, acknowledged, 9 p.m. EM. I sat there for another 5 minutes, listening to the silence. The chapel was still. Outside, the floodlight on the east wall cast a white pool across the gravel path. Beyond that, the cemetery was a series of dark shapes, headstones, trees, the low stone wall. I saw nothing moving. At 9:12 p.m., I returned to the cottage and made a sandwich from the bread and peanut butter I'd brought with me. I ate standing at the kitchen window, looking east over the newer section. The headstones were pale gray shapes in the floodlight spill. The trees beyond swayed in the wind. I didn't see anyone. By 10 p.m., I was back in the chapel office. The check-in went the same way. Name, time, acknowledgement, log entry. I returned to the cottage and tried to read a paperback I'd packed, but I kept looking up at the windows. At 10:43 p.m., I heard a sound outside. A rustling maybe, or footsteps on gravel. I went to the sitting room window that faced west, toward the older section of the cemetery and the access road. I couldn't see anything. The floodlight at the chapel didn't reach that far, and the west side of the cottage was dark. I listened. The rustling stopped. I didn't note it in the log because it had lasted less than a minute. At 11 p.m., I made the check-in, acknowledged, logged. 11:34 p.m., I heard my name. It came from outside the cottage, somewhere to the west. A man's voice, not loud, but clear. Ethan. I was sitting on the couch in the sitting room. I froze. Ethan Marks. I counted seconds in my head. I did not move. I did not go to the window. Ethan, I need to talk to you. The voice was calm, conversational. It sounded like it was coming from maybe 30 yards away, out near the access road. I kept counting. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Ethan, can you hear me? 5 minutes. It's important, Ethan. 9 minutes. I'll wait. 12 minutes. Silence. I waited another 5 minutes, then walked to the chapel and noted it in the log. 11:34 p.m. Heard name called from outside. Ignored per guideline 5. Stopped after approx. 12 minutes. EM. At midnight, I did the check-in, acknowledged, logged. I made coffee and sat in the chapel office, watching the east window. At 12:41 a.m., I saw movement near the center gate. I stood and moved closer to the glass. A deer maybe. 4 legs, low to the ground. It was walking parallel to the stone wall, heading north. Then it stopped. It turned and walked backward for 3 steps. Then forward again, then backward. 5 steps this time, smooth and deliberate, like a film running in reverse. I turned away from the window and walked out of the office. I locked the chapel's east door behind me and went to the cottage. I logged it. 12:41 a.m. Observed animal moving backward near center gate. Returned inside per guideline. 11 EM. At 1 a.m. Check-in. Acknowledged. Logged. At 1:38 a.m. I went upstairs to the bedroom and lay on the bed with my boots still on. I didn't think I'd sleep, but the adrenaline was fading and I was crashing. I set an alarm on my phone for 1:50 a.m. When it buzzed, I went back downstairs. 1:53 a.m. I had 22 minutes before I had to cover the west window. I stood in the sitting room, looking at the window. It was a double-hung sash, maybe 4 feet wide. The blackout curtain hung on a rod beside it. Heavy fabric, black on one side and silver on the other. 2 hooks were screwed into the wall on the opposite side of the window frame. At 2:14 a.m., I pulled the curtain across and hooked it in place. The room went darker. I turned away and went to the kitchen. I did not look back. At 2:15 a.m., I made coffee. At 2:48 a.m., I returned to the sitting room and unhooked the curtain. I secured it on the original side and did not look out the window. I went back to the kitchen. At 3 a.m., check-in. Acknowledged. Logged. At 3:31 a.m., I heard sounds from the basement. I was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to stay awake with my 4th cup of coffee. The sound was rhythmic. Footsteps, maybe. Or something being dragged. It came through the floorboards, muffled but distinct. I didn't move. I noted the time on my phone. The sound continued for 6 minutes, then stopped. I walked to the chapel and logged it. 3:31 a.m. Sounds from cottage basement, noted per guideline. 6. Duration, 6 minutes. EM. At 4 a.m. Check-in. Acknowledged. Logged. At 4:47 a.m., the sky began to lighten in the east. I stood at the chapel office window and watched the darkness thin. The headstones emerged, gray shapes becoming white granite. The trees took form. By 5 a.m., I could see the entire eastern section clearly. I made the 5 a.m. check-in, acknowledged, logged. At 5:51 a.m., I walked to the south gate and unlocked it. Then the center gate, then the north gate. The sky was pink and pale blue. A car passed on Cemetery Road, heading north. I walked back to the cottage and sat on the porch steps. At 6:23 a.m., Mr. Hewitt's pickup truck came up Cemetery Road. He parked near the chapel and walked over. "Morning," he said. "Morning. How'd it go?" I read the binder. I followed the guidelines. I logged everything. "Let's see the log." We went to the chapel office. He read my entry slowly, running his finger down the page. When he finished, he nodded. "Good, clean, no mistakes." "The calling," I said. "Guideline 5. Who was that?" "Doesn't matter who it was. Matters that you didn't answer." "The animal moving backward." "Also doesn't matter. You followed procedure. That's the job." He closed the logbook. "You'll work tonight too. Same routine. I'll be back tomorrow at dawn. You need supplies?" "I'm fine." "Read the amendments," he said. Section B. There are updated guidelines. Nothing major, but read them. He left at 6:41 a.m. I went back to the cottage, made breakfast, and opened the binder to Section B. Section B. Amendments to Core Guidelines. The following amendments clarify or supplement the core operational guidelines. They are to be followed with the same rigor as the original guidelines. Amendment 1. If you hear knocking on any door, in cottage or chapel, between sunset and sunrise, count the knocks. If there are 3 knocks, ignore them completely per Guideline 5. If there are 2 knocks, wait 30 seconds. If there are 2 more knocks exactly 30 seconds later, you may approach the door and ask, "Who's calling?" If the response is Hewitt, you may open the door. If the response is anything else, do not open the door and return to the interior. Log all knocking incidents. Amendment 2. The riding mower in the shed is not to be started or moved after dark. If you hear the mower engine running after dark, remain inside the cottage or chapel. Do not investigate. Note the time and duration in the log. The sound will stop on its own. Amendment 3. Between midnight and 4 a.m., the chapel office radio may emit brief bursts of static or garbled transmissions on Channel 6. This is normal interference and should be ignored. Do not respond to any transmissions other than the supervisor's voice, clearly stating your name, followed by instructions. If you are uncertain whether a transmission is legitimate, wait for the next scheduled check-in. Amendment 4. If you observe lights moving among the headstones after dark, flashlights, lanterns, etc., do not assume they are carried by people. Follow standard observation protocol for 5 minutes. If the lights do not move in a predictable human pattern, straight lines, pauses, consistent speed, return inside and log the observation. Do not attempt to identify the source. Amendment 5. The telephone in the cottage is for emergency use only and should only be used as specified in Section C. If the telephone rings between sunset and sunrise, do not answer it. Unplug it if necessary. Log the time of any ringing. Amendment 6. If you find objects inside the cottage or chapel that were not there at the start of your shift, coins, notes, small items, do not touch them. Place a coffee mug or other container over them to mark their location. Inform the supervisor at dawn. Do not read any notes or writing. Amendment 7. The gravel path connecting the cottage to the chapel is the only approved outdoor route after dark. If you find debris, branches, or other obstacles blocking this path, step carefully over them. Do not clear them. Do not leave the path to go around them. If the path is completely impassable, remain in whichever structure you are currently occupying until dawn. Amendment 8. If the propane heater in the cottage makes clicking sounds in groups of 7, turn it off immediately. Do not turn it back on until after dawn. Use blankets or sleeping bags for warmth. Note the time in the log. Amendment 9. Do not wear a green jacket or any predominantly green outerwear during your shift. This includes hooded sweatshirts, coats, and vests. If you see your own clothing reflected in a window or mirror and it appears green when you know it is not, turn away immediately. Do not look again. Remain inside until the next check-in. Then log the incident. Amendment 10. The freezer in the chapel basement is locked and should remain locked. You do not have access to this area. If you hear the freezer running or humming, this is normal. If you hear the freezer door opening or closing, log it but take no action. I slept until noon. When I woke, I made lunch and walked the property in daylight. The cemetery looked ordinary. Headstones in rows, grass trimmed, trees shedding leaves. I found the shed behind the cottage and checked the equipment. Riding mower, push mower, shovels, rakes, bags of salt, coils of rope. Everything organized and clean. I found the 3 floodlights and traced their wiring back to the timer box in the shed. The timer was an old mechanical unit with pins for each half-hour increment. 7:31 p.m. was marked with 2 pins. At 3 p.m., I walked down to the south gate and looked out at Cemetery Road. A pickup truck passed, going fast. The driver didn't look at me. At 4 p.m., I checked the chapel office. The radio was still on channel 6. The logbook was where I'd left it. I sat at the desk and read yesterday's entry again. Heard calling from west side, ignored per guideline 5. At 5:37 p.m., the sun was 15 minutes from setting. I locked the cottage door and walked to the north gate. At 5:44 p.m., I locked the north gate. At 5:48 p.m., I locked the center gate. At 5:52 p.m., I locked the south gate. At 7:31 p.m., the floodlights activated. At 9 p.m., I made the check-in. Acknowledged, logged. At 9:41 p.m., I heard knocking on the cottage's front door. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. I was in the kitchen. I froze and counted. 3 knocks. I did not go to the door. I did not call out. I stayed in the kitchen and waited. No more knocks came. I logged it. 9:41 p.m., 3 knocks on cottage front door. Ignored per amendment. 1 a.m. at 10 p.m., check-in. Acknowledged, logged. At 10:39 p.m., I heard the riding mower start. The sound came from the direction of the shed, a small engine turning over and catching, then settling into an idle. I was in the cottage sitting room. I walked to the east window and looked toward the shed. I couldn't see anything. The floodlight on the chapel didn't reach that far. The engine ran for 11 minutes, then stopped. I logged it. 10:39 p.m. Mower engine running per amendment. 2. Duration, 11 minutes. EM. At 11 p.m., check-in, acknowledged, logged. At 11:58 p.m., I heard 2 knocks on the chapel's east door. I was already in the chapel office, filling the electric kettle for tea. I set the kettle down and waited. 30 seconds. Then 2 more knocks. I walked to the door and stood 2 feet back. Who's calling? Silence. 5 seconds. Hewitt. The voice was Mr. Hewitt's. Dry, faint, exactly like the radio. I unlocked the door and opened it 6 inches. The gravel path was empty. The floodlight illuminated 50 feet of path. The cottage beyond, nothing else. No person. No movement. I closed the door and locked it. I logged it. 11:58 p.m. 2 knocks on chapel east door. Repeated per amendment. 1. Responded Hewitt. Door opened. No one present. EM. At midnight. Check-in. Acknowledged. Logged. At 12:33 a.m., I heard static on the radio. Short bursts, 5 seconds each. 3 bursts total. I was sitting at the desk. I did not touch the radio. The static stopped. At 1 a.m., check-in. Acknowledged. Logged. At 2:14 a.m., I covered the west window. At 2:48 a.m., I uncovered it. At 3 a.m., check-in. Acknowledged. Logged. At 3:41 a.m., I found a coin on the kitchen table. It was a quarter. I had not placed it there. The table had been empty when I made coffee at 3:15 a.m. I went to the cupboard and took down a coffee mug. I placed the mug over the quarter and left it. I logged it. 3:41 a.m. Quarter found on kitchen table. Covered per amendment. 6. EM. At 4 a.m. Check-in. Acknowledged. Logged. At 5 a.m. Check-in. Acknowledged. Logged. At 5:51 a.m. I unlocked the gates. South, center, north. At 6:18 a.m., Mr. Hewitt arrived. He read the log, nodded, and walked to the cottage. I showed him the coffee mug on the table. He lifted it, looked at the quarter, and put the mug back down. "Don't touch it," he said. "I'll handle it." He left at 6:37 a.m. That day, I slept until 1 p.m. I ate, read the binder again, and walked the property. At 5:49 p.m., I locked the gates. At 9 p.m., check-in, acknowledged, the pattern held. On the 4th night, October 6th, I saw lights moving among the headstones at 10:21 p.m. I was standing at the chapel office window, looking east. 2 lights, pale yellow, bobbing through the newer section. They moved in straight lines for a few seconds, then stopped. Then they separated, one moving north, one moving south, both at the same speed. They converged again near the center path, then blinked out. I logged it. 10:21 p.m., observed 2 lights moving among headstones. Non-predictable pattern per amendment. 4, duration, approx. 4 minutes. EM. On the 5th night, October 7th, the telephone rang at 1:43 a.m. 4 rings, then silence. I was in the cottage kitchen. I did not answer. I unplugged the phone from the wall and logged it. On the 6th night, October 8th, I heard knocking at 2:31 a.m. 2 knocks on the cottage door. I waited 30 seconds. 2 more knocks. I went to the door. "Who's calling?" "Hewitt." I opened the door. The porch was empty. The gravel path stretched away toward the chapel, illuminated and vacant. I closed the door and logged it. On the 7th night, October 9th, the propane heater began clicking at 11:57 p.m. I counted the clicks, 7. I turned the heater off and logged it. The cottage grew cold. I wrapped myself in the sleeping bag and sat at the kitchen table until dawn. Every morning, Mr. Hewitt read the log and nodded. He asked no questions. He offered no explanations. On the 8th morning, October 10th, he handed me an envelope with $400 in 20s. "You've done well," he said. "You'll keep working." "Yes." "Good. I'm adding another section to the binder. Emergency protocols for extended events. You'll need to read it today." He left. I opened the binder to a new section labeled Section D, Extended Event Protocols. Section D, Extended Event Protocols. These protocols apply during prolonged incidents requiring heightened vigilance. They will be activated by the supervisor via radio with the phrase "Condition Yellow" or condition red. Do not implement these protocols without explicit activation. Condition yellow, elevated activity. If the supervisor declares condition yellow, the following modifications are in effect. 1. Check-ins increase to every 30 minutes, 9 p.m., 9:30 p.m., 10 p.m., etc. 2. Remain in the chapel office for the duration of condition yellow. Do not return to the cottage except in the case of structural emergency, fire, collapse, etc. 3. All exterior lights, floodlights, chapel interior lights visible through windows must remain on. Do not turn off any lights for any reason. 4. Do not respond to knocking, calling, or other contact attempts. Observe and log only. 5. If you see a person or figure approaching the chapel, turn off the office light and remain silent. Do not look out the window until 30 minutes have passed since you last observed the figure. Condition red, lockdown. If the supervisor declares condition red, the following protocols are mandatory. 1. Immediately go to the chapel office. Lock the office door from the inside using the interior bolt. Do not leave the office until the supervisor declares condition green via radio, or until dawn, whichever comes first. 2. Turn off all lights in the chapel except the small desk lamp in the office. Close the office door curtain installed on the interior window, and do not open it. 3. Check-ins will occur every 15 minutes. The supervisor will initiate each check-in by saying your name, followed by condition red check. You will respond with your name and the current time only. Do not add additional information. Do not ask questions. 4. You will hear sounds during condition red. These may include footsteps in the chapel, knocking on the office door, voices, or scraping sounds. Do not respond. Do not open the door. Remain seated at the desk with your back to the door. 5. If the office door handle turns, or if pressure is applied to the door, brace the desk chair against it. Do not look at the door. Continue to respond to radio check-ins as normal. 6. Condition red will last a minimum of 2 hours. The supervisor will declare condition green when it is safe. Upon hearing condition green, wait 5 additional minutes before unlocking the office door. Open it slowly. If the chapel interior appears normal, you may exit. If you observe any changes, moved pews, open doors, objects out of place, remain in the office and radio the supervisor immediately. 7. Do not ask the supervisor why condition red was declared. It will be logged as extended incident and requires no further documentation from you. I read Section D 3 times. Then I closed the binder and tried to sleep, but my hands were shaking. That night, October 10th, was quiet. I followed the standard routine, check-ins every hour. No calling, no knocking, no lights. At dawn, I unlocked the gates and waited for Mr. Hewitt. He read the log and nodded. "Quiet night," he said. "Yes, won't always be that way." He left. On the 11th night, October 11th, at 10:47 p.m., the radio crackled. "Ethan Marks," Mr. Hewitt's voice. I was in the chapel office. I keyed the microphone. "This is Ethan Marks. Condition yellow. Acknowledge." My stomach dropped. Acknowledged. Condition yellow. Check-ins every 30 minutes starting now. Remain in the chapel office. Acknowledge. Acknowledged. The radio went silent. I locked the chapel's east door from the inside. I checked the office door bolt. Secure. I sat at the desk and opened the logbook. 10:47 p.m. Condition yellow declared by supervisor. EM. At 11 p.m., I made the check-in. Name and time. Acknowledged. At 11:17 p.m., I heard footsteps on the gravel path outside. Slow, deliberate. They approached the chapel's east door and stopped. Silence, then 3 knocks. I did not move. I did not look toward the window. I logged it. 11:17 p.m., footsteps and knocking on east door. No response per protocols. EM, at 11:30 p.m., check-in, acknowledged. At 11:51 p.m., I heard voices outside. 2 voices, maybe 3, speaking in low tones I couldn't make out. They circled the chapel. I heard them pass the south side, then the west side near the front door, then the north side. They stopped at the east door again. One of the voices called my name. Ethan. I stared at the desk. I did not answer. Ethan Marks, we need you to open the door. The voice was calm. It sounded like Mr. Hewitt. It's important, Ethan. There's been an incident. I kept my eyes on the logbook. I logged the time. 11:51 p.m. At midnight, check-in, acknowledged. The voices stopped at 12:09 a.m. At 12:30 a.m., check-in, acknowledged. At 1 a.m., check-in, acknowledged. At 1:37 a.m., the radio crackled. Ethan Marks. This is Ethan Marks. Condition green, acknowledge. Acknowledged. Condition green. Wait 5 minutes. Then you may resume standard protocol. Check in at 2 a.m. as normal. Acknowledged. I sat at the desk and watched the clock. At 1:42 a.m., I stood and unlocked the office door. I opened it slowly. The chapel interior was unchanged. Pews in rows, altar undisturbed, east door closed. I walked through the chapel and checked the east door lock. Secure. I looked out the small window beside the door. The gravel path was empty. The floodlight cast its white pool across the grass. I returned to the office and logged it. 1:37 a.m. Condition green declared. Chapel interior normal. EM at 2 a.m. Check-in acknowledged. The rest of the night was quiet. At dawn, I unlocked the gates. Mr. Hewitt arrived at 6:23 a.m. He read the log. You did well, he said. What was that? Extended incident. Happens maybe once a month. You handled it correctly. The voices. Doesn't matter what they said. Matters that you stayed inside. He closed the logbook. You'll keep working? Yes. He left. On the 12th night, October 12th, I saw a figure in a green jacket at 9:34 p.m. I was in the chapel office, standing near the window. The figure was walking through the older section, near the slate headstones. It moved slowly, hands in pockets, head down. The green jacket was dark, almost black in the floodlight's spill. I turned away immediately and sat at the desk. I did not look out the window again. I logged it. 9:34 p.m. Figure in green jacket observed in old section. No further observation per guideline. 8 EM at 10 p.m. Check-in acknowledged. At 10:53 p.m. I heard scraping sounds on the chapel's roof. Long, dragging sounds, like something being pulled across shingles. It moved from the west side to the east side, directly above the office. Then it stopped. I logged it. At 11 p.m., check-in. Acknowledged. At midnight, the radio emitted a burst of static, then a voice, not Mr. Hewitt. A younger voice rushed and panicked. Need help. Anyone on this channel. I did not respond. The voice cut off. More static. Silence. I logged it. 12:00 a.m. Garbled transmission on channel 6. Did not respond per amendment. 3 EM at 1 a.m. Check-in. Acknowledged. At 2:14 a.m., I walked to the cottage to cover the west window. The gravel path was clear. I entered the cottage, hooked the curtain in place, and returned to the chapel. At 2:48 a.m., I went back and removed the curtain. At 3 a.m., check-in. Acknowledged. At 4:06 a.m., I found a note on the desk. It was a small piece of paper folded once. I had not placed it there. The desk had been empty when I made the 3 a.m. check-in. I took a coffee mug from the shelf and placed it over the note without reading it. I logged it. 4:06 a.m. Note found on office desk. Covered per amendment. De 6 e.m. at 5 a.m. Check-in. Acknowledged. At dawn, I unlocked the gates. Mr. Hewitt arrived at 6:21 a.m. He read the log and went to the chapel office. He lifted the mug, unfolded the note, read it, and put it in his pocket. "What did it say?" I asked. "Doesn't matter." "Someone got inside." "No one got inside. You followed procedures. That's what matters." He left at 6:39 a.m. I slept until noon. When I woke, I found a new section in the binder. Section E, Breach Response Protocols. Section E, Breach Response Protocols. A breach is defined as any unauthorized entry into the cemetery after gates are locked, or any sign that the secured perimeter has been compromised. Breaches are rare, but require immediate and precise response. Indicators of breach. The gates are unlocked or open when you know they were secured. Fresh footprints or vehicle tracks inside the cemetery that were not there at sunset. Objects moved or displaced. Headstones, equipment, supplies. Sounds of forced entry, breaking glass, splintering wood, metal stress. Direct observation of a person or persons inside the cemetery who were not present at the time of gate lock-in. Response steps. 1. If you observe or suspect a breach, immediately go to the chapel office and radio the supervisor with the phrase "possible breach," followed by your location. Do not say anything else. Wait for instructions. 2. Do not approach or confront anyone you observe inside the cemetery. Remain in the chapel office or cottage and maintain visual observation if safe to do so. Log all observations with times and descriptions. 3. If the breach involves attempted entry into the cottage or chapel, move to the structure that is not being targeted. Use the gravel path. If both structures are targeted, lock yourself in the chapel office and do not leave until dawn or until the supervisor arrives in person. 4. Do not use the telephone during a breach unless the supervisor has not responded to radio contact within 10 minutes. In that case, call the number posted beside the telephone and follow the instructions given. 5. If you observe a breach by someone wearing a green jacket, follow Guideline 8 without deviation. Do not report it as a breach. Log it as an observation only. 6. After a breach is resolved, supervisor declares all clear or dawn arrives with no further incident. You will conduct a full perimeter check with the supervisor present. Do not conduct this check alone. On the 13th night, October 13th, at 11:32 p.m., I heard breaking glass. The sound came from the direction of the cottage. Sharp, distinct, the sound of a window shattering. I was in the chapel office. I grabbed the radio. "This is Ethan Marks. Possible breach. Chapel office." 3 seconds of static. Acknowledged. Remain in chapel office. Lock the door. Do not investigate. I'm coming. Acknowledged. I locked the office door with the interior bolt. I turned off the desk lamp. I sat in the dark and waited. At 11:39 p.m., I heard footsteps in the chapel. Slow, heavy footsteps moving up the center aisle. They reached the altar and stopped. Silence. Then the footsteps moved toward the office door. They stopped outside the door. I heard breathing. Slow, steady breathing. The door handle turned. I stayed in the chair, hands gripping the armrests. The handle turned back and forth. The bolt held. After 2 minutes, the footsteps retreated. At 1 a.m., check-in. Acknowledged. At 2:14 a.m., I explained to Paul that we couldn't cover the cottage window due to isolation protocols. He nodded, understanding. At 3 a.m., check-in. Acknowledged. At 4:17 a.m., Paul whispered, "How long have you been doing this?" 20 nights. Does it get easier? No, but you get better at following the rules. At 5 a.m., check-in. Acknowledged. At dawn, we unlocked the gates together. Mr. Hewitt arrived at 6:24 a.m. He read the log and nodded. "You both did well," he said. Paul left at 6:41 a.m. Mr. Hewitt stayed. "He'll come back tonight," he said. "He needs the money. They always need the money." Will he last? That depends on whether he trusts the rules more than he trusts his own judgment. He left at 7:03 a.m. That day, I slept poorly. I kept hearing Claire's voice calling for Paul. At 3 p.m., I gave up and made coffee. I walked the cemetery in daylight. The afternoon sun made everything look ordinary, peaceful even. At 4:39 p.m., Paul returned. He looked tired. "You're back," I said. "I need this job, my wife's medical bills." He stopped. "I'll follow the rules, I promise." That night, October 20th, we followed the routine. Gates locked, floodlights on, check-ins every hour. At 10:29 p.m., we heard scratching on the roof. At midnight, we heard knocking on the front door. At 2:37 a.m., we heard the basement door in the cottage rattling. Paul stayed calm. He logged everything. He didn't try to leave. At dawn, Mr. Hewitt read the log and nodded. The pattern held for 6 more nights. Paul and I worked together. We locked gates. We made check-ins. We logged anomalies. We heard voices using our names, our loved ones' names. We heard footsteps and knocking and scraping. We stayed inside. We followed the rules. On the 27th night, October 27th, at 11:17 p.m., Paul stood suddenly. "I need to use the restroom," he said. "I'll wait outside the door," I said. We left the office together. The restroom was on the north side of the chapel, accessible from the hallway behind the altar. I stood outside while Paul went in. 2 minutes passed. "Paul, you okay?" No answer. "Paul?" I heard water running in the sink. "Paul, answer me." The water stopped. The door opened. Paul stood there looking at me. "I'm fine," he said, but his eyes were wrong, flat, empty. "Let's go back to the office," I said. He walked past me toward the chapel's front door. "Paul, stop." He reached for the door handle. I grabbed his arm and pulled him back. "What are you doing?" "I need to go outside." "No, you don't." "I need to check the gates." "The gates are locked. We lock them at sunset." He pulled against my grip. "I need to check them." I dragged him back toward the office. He fought me, but he was thin and I was stronger. I got him into the office and locked the door. "Paul, listen to me. You're not thinking clearly." Caretaker stared at the door. "I need to go outside." I grabbed the radio. "This is Ethan Marks, code white. Acknowledged. Restrain the affected party. Do not let them leave. I'm coming." I put Paul in the chair and stood between him and the door. He tried to stand twice. I pushed him back down. "I need to go outside," he said again. "No, you don't. That's not you talking." At 11:34 a.m., Mr. Hewitt's truck arrived. He came to the office with a first aid kit. He knelt in front of Paul and looked into his eyes. "Paul Vickers, look at me." Paul looked at him. "You're staying inside. You're not leaving. Do you understand?" "I need to..." "No, you don't. That's not your thought. That's something else. You're going to stay in this chair until dawn. Ethan will stay with you. I'll be in the chapel. If you try to leave, we'll restrain you. Do you understand?" Paul blinked. His eyes cleared slightly. Yes, I understand." Mr. Hewitt stood. "Ethan, if he tries to leave again, tie his wrists with this." He handed me a zip tie. "Not tight enough to hurt, just enough to keep him from opening doors." "Understood." Mr. Hewitt left. I sat across from Paul and watched him. At midnight, I made the check-in one-handed, keeping my eyes on Paul. At 12:41 a.m., Paul said quietly, "I wanted to open the door. I don't know why." "It happens," I said. "Mr. Hewitt warned me. They get inside your head sometimes." "Did it happen to you?" "Not yet." "What stopped me?" "The rules, and me not letting you break them." He was quiet for a long time. "Thank you." At dawn, Paul was himself again. We unlocked the gates together. Mr. Hewitt checked him over and sent him home at 7:12 a.m. "He'll be back tonight," Mr. Hewitt said. "Are you sure?" "He needs the money, and he knows the rules work. He'll be more careful." Paul returned that evening. He was quiet but steady. We worked together for 3 more nights without incident. On the 31st night, October 31st, Halloween, Mr. Hewitt added new protocols. "More people will try to get in tonight," he said. "Teenagers, thrill seekers. You'll see lights on Cemetery Road, maybe cars parked outside the gates. Ignore them unless they breach the perimeter. If they breach, follow standard protocols. Understand?" "Understood," Paul and I said together. That night, we saw headlights on Cemetery Road 6 times. Twice, we heard voices shouting near the north gate. At midnight, someone threw something over the fence. It landed near the center path with a soft thump. We logged it, but did not investigate. At 2:37 a.m., we heard the chapel's front door open. Paul looked at me. I shook my head. We stayed in the office. Footsteps entered the chapel. Many sets of footsteps. They moved through the space, circling, exploring. A young man's voice called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" We didn't answer. "Dude, this place is creepy as hell." Another voice, younger. "Let's check the altar." The footsteps approached the altar. We heard shuffling, whispers. Then one of the voices screamed. It was a raw, terrified scream. The footsteps scattered, running for the door. More screaming. The front door slammed open. The footsteps fled down the access road. Silence. Paul and I looked at each other. "What did they see?" Paul whispered. "I don't know." "Should we check?" "No, we stay here." At 3 a.m., check in. Acknowledged. At 5 a.m., check in. Acknowledged. At dawn, we left the office together. We walked through the chapel. Everything looked normal. The altar was undisturbed. The pews were in rows. The front door was closed. But there was a smell. Faint, sweet, like decay. Mr. Hewitt arrived at 6:21 a.m. He smelled it too. "Open the windows," he said. "Air it out." We opened all the chapel windows. The smell faded. "What did those kids see?" I asked. "Something they shouldn't have." He closed the logbook. "They won't come back." November passed. Paul and I worked every night. We followed the rules. We logged everything. We heard voices, footsteps, scraping, knocking. We saw lights among the headstones, figures in green jackets, animals moving wrong. We stayed inside. We made our check-ins. We survived. On December 1st, Mr. Hewitt called me into his office at dawn. "I'm hiring a 3rd person," he said. "You'll train them, starting tonight." "Who?" "A woman from Bennington. Her name is Sarah Chen. She's read the binder. She understands the job." Sarah arrived at 4:42 p.m. She was in her 30s, calm, direct. We shook hands. "I know the rules," she said. "I'll follow them." "Good," I said. That night, the three of us worked together. We locked the gates. We made check-ins. We stayed in the chapel office. Sarah was quiet but observant. When we heard calling at 10:53 p.m., she didn't flinch. When we heard knocking at midnight, she logged it with steady hands. At dawn, Mr. Hewitt read the log. "Good work," he said. "All three of you." In the second week of December, Mr. Hewitt changed the schedule. Paul, Sarah, and I would rotate, 2 working each night, 1 resting. It meant more money and less exhaustion. On December 14th, my 57th night, I worked with Sarah. It was quiet, no calling, no knocking, just the routine. At dawn, we unlocked the gates and waited for Mr. Hewitt. He arrived at 6:27 a.m. "Ethan, I need to talk to you." We walked to the cottage. He sat at the kitchen table. "You've been here almost 2.5 months," he said. "You've followed every rule. You've never broken protocol. You've trained 2 people." "Yes." "I'm going to retire at the end of the year. I need someone to take over as supervisor. Someone who knows the rules, who understands what this place needs. I want it to be you." I stared at him. "Me? You'll get a salary, $1,200 a week. You'll manage the day work, handle the hiring, check the logs, respond to radio calls. You'll live in the cottage full time. Are you interested?" I thought about the bankruptcy, the debt, the future I didn't have. I thought about the rules that had kept me alive for 57 nights. "Yes," I said. "I'm interested." "Good. I'll train you through the end of December. You'll take over January 1st. He stood and shook my hand. I spent the rest of December learning the supervisor role. Mr. Hewitt showed me the equipment maintenance schedules, the supply orders, the payroll system. He showed me how to respond to code white situations, how to read the logs for patterns, how to recognize when something was escalating. On December 31st, my 74th night, I worked with Paul and Sarah together. We locked the gates at 5:51 p.m. We made our check-ins every hour. At midnight, we watched the new year arrive in the chapel office, silent and alert. At dawn, Mr. Hewitt arrived one last time. He read the log. "Clean. Good." He handed me a new key ring. "You're the supervisor now. Paul and Sarah will work tonight. You'll monitor from here during the day, respond to radio calls at night, hire as needed, follow the protocols, keep everyone safe." "I will. One more thing." He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather journal. This was kept by the man who trained me. He started working here in 1979. It's not part of the binder, it's observations, patterns he noticed. Read it when you need to. He handed me the journal. "Good luck, Ethan." He left at 7:09 a.m. I watched his truck disappear down Cemetery Road. Then I opened the journal. The first entry was dated March 12th, 1979. "They've been here longer than the graves. They were here before the cemetery. Maybe they were here before the town. The rules don't keep them out. The rules keep them contained. Follow them exactly. Never improvise. The cost of deviation is always worse than you imagine." I closed the journal and looked out at the cemetery. Headstones in rows, grass and trees, stone walls and iron gates. At 4:37 p.m., Paul and Sarah arrived for their shift. I gave them the binder and the keyring. "Lock the gates at sunset," I said. "Follow every rule. Radio me if anything escalates. I'll be listening on Channel 6. "Understood," they said together. At 5:53 p.m., I watched them lock the south gate. At 7:31 p.m., the floodlights activated. At 9 p.m., the radio crackled. "This is Paul Vickers. Time is 9 p.m. I keyed the microphone. Acknowledged, 9 p.m. I sat at the kitchen table in the cottage with the radio, the logbook, and the leather journal. Outside, the cemetery settled into darkness. I opened the journal to the second page and began to read. There were protocols in here that weren't in the binder. Observations about the figures in green jackets. Notes about patterns in the timing of incidents. Warnings about what happens when too many rules are broken in sequence. At 10 p.m., Paul's check-in. Acknowledged. At 11 p.m., check-in. Acknowledged. I made coffee and continued reading. The journal covered 46 years of observations. Some entries were brief. 3 figures tonight, all wearing green, stayed clear of chapel. Others were longer. Daniel broke Guideline 5 on his 3rd night. Answered when they called his name. Found him at dawn near the old section. He couldn't explain where he'd been for 6 hours. Quit that morning. Never came back. At midnight, check-in. Acknowledged. At 1:37 a.m., the radio crackled. "Supervisor, this is Paul Vickers." I grabbed the microphone. "Go ahead." "We're hearing footsteps in the chapel. Multiple sets. They're not approaching the office, just circling." Acknowledged. Follow standard protocols. Lock the office door. Don't engage. I'm monitoring. Understood. At 2 a.m., check-in. Acknowledged. Paul noted the footsteps had stopped. At 5 a.m., final check-in. Acknowledged. At 5:51 a.m., I watched through the cottage window as Paul and Sarah unlocked the gates. They walked back to the chapel together, alive and whole. At 6:23 a.m., they came to the cottage. I checked them over, read Sarah's log entries. Everything correct. Everything followed. "Good work," I said. "Both of you. Go home. Rest. I'll see you tomorrow night." They left at 6:39 a.m. I walked through the cemetery in the early morning light. I checked each section, each path, each gate. Everything was in order. I returned to the cottage and updated the master log. At 9 a.m., I called the supply company to order more salt, batteries, and lamp oil. At noon, I walked to the shed and checked the mowers, the tools, the breaker box. Everything maintained. At 3 p.m., I sat at the kitchen table and began writing a new set of guidelines for future groundskeepers. Clarifications based on what I'd learned. Small adjustments to the timing, the procedures, the language. The rules had to evolve. The work had to continue. At 4:36 p.m., Paul and Sarah returned. I gave them the updated guidelines. "Read these before sunset. New amendment about radio check-ins during severe weather. Otherwise, standard protocols." "Understood," Paul said. At 5:54 p.m., they locked the gates. I sat in the cottage with the radio and the journal. Outside, the sun dropped behind the mountains. The sky turned orange, then purple, then black. At 7:31 p.m., the floodlights activated. At 9 p.m., Paul's check-in. "This is Paul Vickers. Time is 9 p.m. I keyed the microphone. Acknowledged, 9 p.m. I made coffee and opened the journal to a page near the end. The last entry was dated December 30th, 2024, written by Mr. Hewitt. 74 years this cemetery has stood. 23 years I've kept the watch. The rules work because they're specific, because they're consistent, because they don't try to explain what's here, only how to coexist with it. The next supervisor will learn this. They always do. The ones who last are the ones who stop asking why and simply follow. Pass this journal to the next person. Make sure they understand. The rules aren't meant to be believed. They're meant to be obeyed. I closed the journal. At 10 p.m., check-in. Acknowledged. I sat in the dark cottage and listened to the radio. Paul and Sarah were in the chapel office, following the procedures, logging the anomalies, surviving the night. At dawn, they would unlock the gates and go home. Tomorrow night, they would return. And the night after that, and the night after that, the work would continue. I opened a fresh page in my own notebook and wrote the date, January 2nd, 2026. Then I wrote, new supervisor log, first entry. Everything is in order. The rules are working. Paul and Sarah are following protocols. No major incidents. I'm preparing an updated section for the binder. Guidelines for 3-person teams during extended events. We'll implement next week. Note to future supervisors. Trust the rules more than you trust your judgment. Trust your groundskeepers to do the same. This cemetery is older than we know. It will be here long after we're gone. Our job is simple. Keep the watch, follow the rules, make sure the morning comes. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. The floodlights cast their white pools across the grass. The headstones stood in silent rows. I closed the notebook and waited for the 9 p.m. check-in. Testing. The door held, then knocking. 5 knocks, fast and hard. I did not respond. More knocking. 10 knocks, louder. Silence. At 11:57 p.m., I heard an engine outside. Headlights swept across the chapel windows. The footsteps in the chapel moved quickly back down the aisle. I heard the east door open and close. A minute later, 3 knocks on the office door. 2 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks again. Who's calling? Hewitt. I unlocked the door. Mr. Hewitt stood there with a flashlight and a crowbar. Behind him, the chapel was empty. You're all right? Yes. Stay here. I'm checking the cottage. He left. I sat at the desk and logged everything. 11:32 p.m. Breaking glass from cottage direction. Reported breach. 11:39 p.m. Footsteps in chapel. Door handle turned, knocking. 11:57 p.m. Supervisor arrived. E.M. Mr. Hewitt returned at 12:14 a.m. East window in the cottage is broken, he said. No one inside. I've secured it with plywood. You'll stay in the chapel office the rest of the night. What broke the window? Could be a branch. Could be something else. Doesn't matter. You followed procedure. He left at 12:23 a.m. I stayed in the chapel office. At 1 a.m., I made the check-in. At 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m., check-ins. All acknowledged. At dawn, Mr. Hewitt returned with glass and glazing compound. We walked to the cottage together. The east window had a clean hole in the center, about the size of a fist. No glass on the inside sill. All the glass was outside, on the ground. Something hit it from inside, I said. Mr. Hewitt knelt and examined the glass shards. Could be. But I locked the cottage. No one was inside. He stood. You'll work tonight? Yes. He repaired the window that afternoon while I slept. When I woke at 4 p.m., the window was whole, the compound still wet. On the 14th night, October 14th, the radio call came at 8:41 p.m. before my first check-in. Ethan Marks. This is Ethan Marks. Condition read. Acknowledge. My blood went cold. Acknowledged. Condition read. Proceed to chapel office immediately. Lock the office door. I will initiate check-ins every 15 minutes. Acknowledge. Acknowledged. I was already in the chapel office. I locked the door and turned off all lights except the desk lamp. I closed the curtain on the interior window. I sat at the desk and logged it. 8:41 p.m. Condition read, declared. Office secured. EM. At 8:45 p.m., the radio crackled. Ethan Marks, condition red check. Ethan Marks, 8:45 p.m. Acknowledged. At 9 p.m., the same. Name, time, acknowledged. At 9:07 p.m., I heard the chapel's front door open. The sound was unmistakable. The old hinges creaked. Footsteps entered the chapel. Multiple sets of footsteps. They moved slowly up the aisle. I kept my eyes on the desk. I did not turn toward the door. The footsteps reached the altar. They stopped. I heard whispers, low voices, too quiet to understand. At 9:15 p.m., check-in. Name, time, acknowledged. The footsteps moved again. They spread out through the chapel. Some went to the north side, some to the south. One set approached the office door. They stopped outside. Silence, then scratching. Long, slow scratching on the wooden door. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. At 9:30 p.m., check-in. Name, time, acknowledged. The scratching stopped. At 9:51 p.m., the office door handle turned, slowly, testing. The bolt held. The handle returned to center, knocking. 7 knocks. I did not respond. I kept my back to the door. At 10 p.m., check-in. Name, time, acknowledged. At 10:22 p.m., I heard a voice outside the office door. Ethan, it's me. My brother's voice. Michael. I hadn't seen Michael in 4 years. Not since the bankruptcy started. Not since he told me I was on my own. Ethan, I need to talk to you. Open the door. I stared at the logbook. I did not answer. Come on, Ethan. I drove all the way up here. Don't be a dick. The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every tone. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry about the money. Open the door and we'll talk. At 10:30 p.m., check-in. Name, time, acknowledged. The voice stopped. At 10:48 p.m., the door handle turned again. Harder this time. The handle rattled. The door shook in its frame. I stood and pushed the desk chair against the door, bracing it. The rattling continued for 37 seconds, then stopped. At 11 p.m., check-in. Name, time, acknowledged. At 11:23 p.m., all sound stopped. The chapel went silent. No footsteps, no whispers, no scratching. Just silence. At 11:30 p.m., check-in. Name, time, acknowledged. At 11:59 p.m., the radio crackled. Ethan Marks. Ethan Marks. 11:59 p.m. Condition green. Wait 5 minutes. Check the chapel before exiting the office. Acknowledge. Acknowledged. I waited. At 12:04 a.m., I moved the chair and unlocked the door. I opened it slowly. The chapel was empty. Pews in rows. Altar undisturbed. Front door closed. I walked up the aisle and checked the front door. Locked. The chapel key was the only key that opened it, and the key was on my ring. I returned to the office and logged it. 11:59 p.m. Condition green declared. Chapel empty. Front door locked. EM at midnight. Check-in. Acknowledged. The rest of the night was quiet. At dawn, I unlocked the gates. Mr. Hewitt arrived at 6:26 a.m. He read the log for a long time. They used your brother's voice, he said. Yes. They know things they shouldn't know. That's why you don't answer. That's why you don't open the door. What are they? He closed the logbook. Doesn't matter what they are. Matters that the rules keep them out. Do they always? He looked at me. They have so far. He left. That day, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed until 3 p.m., staring at the ceiling. Then I got up and walked the property. I checked every headstone in the old section, reading names and dates. The oldest was from 1801. The newest in that section was from 1923. I found one headstone near the south corner with no name, just a date, 1847. the year the cemetery was founded. At 5 p.m., I made coffee and read the binder again. Every section, every amendment, every protocol. I was looking for something I'd missed, some explanation. There was none. At 5:49 p.m., I locked the gates. On the 15th night, October 15th, I saw a second figure in a green jacket. It was 10:17 p.m. I was in the chapel office. The figure was standing in the newer section near the center path, facing the chapel. It didn't move, just stood there. I turned away and logged it. At 11 p.m., check-in. Acknowledged. At 11:41 p.m., I heard the cottage door open and close. I was in the chapel office. I hadn't been to the cottage since 9:30 p.m. I grabbed the radio. "This is Ethan Marks. Possible breach. Cottage door." Acknowledged. Stay in chapel office. Acknowledged. At 11:53 p.m., Mr. Hewitt's truck came up the access road. He parked near the chapel and went to the cottage with his flashlight. He was inside for 6 minutes. When he came out, he walked to the chapel office. Door was open, no one inside, no sign of forced entry. "I locked it." "I know you did. I'm securing it now. You'll stay here tonight." He left at 12:09 a.m. At 1 a.m., check-in. Acknowledged. At 2:14 a.m., I walked to the cottage to cover the west window, but I stopped on the gravel path. The cottage door was open again, 6 inches, dark interior beyond. I did not approach. I returned to the chapel and radioed. "This is Ethan Marks. Cottage door open again. Acknowledged. Do not enter the cottage. Remain in chapel until dawn." Acknowledged. I logged it. At 3 a.m., check-in. Acknowledged. At 4:38 a.m., I heard footsteps on the cottage porch. Slow, heavy footsteps. They crossed the porch and descended the steps. They moved onto the gravel path toward the chapel. I locked the chapel's east door and retreated to the office. I locked the office door. The footsteps reached the chapel. They stopped at the east door. Silence. At 5 a.m., check-in. Acknowledged. At 5:51 a.m., dawn. I unlocked the office door and checked the chapel. Empty. I opened the east door carefully. The gravel path was empty. The cottage door was closed. Mr. Hewitt arrived at 6:19 a.m. We walked to the cottage together. The door was locked. He opened it with his key. The interior was undisturbed. The west window curtain was hanging on its original hooks, not covering the window. "You didn't cover the window," he said. "The door was open. I couldn't approach." He nodded. "That's correct. You followed procedure." We checked the entire cottage. Nothing missing, nothing moved. The bedroom, the kitchen, the sitting room, all normal. He walked to the basement door and checked the lock. Secure. "I'm going to add something to the binder," he said. "New protocols. You'll read them today." He left at 6:52 a.m. I opened the binder to a new section. Section F, Isolation Protocols. Section F, Isolation Protocols. If at any time you are unable to access the cottage due to breach indicators, open doors, or other security concerns, you will implement the following isolation protocols. 1. Remain in the chapel office for the duration of the night. Do not attempt to return to the cottage for any reason, including the window curtain procedure in Guideline 7. 2. The chapel office has emergency supplies in the filing cabinet: bottled water, protein bars, a blanket, a battery-powered lantern, and a first aid kit. Use these as needed. 3. Check-ins will continue as normal. If you are unable to complete a timed procedure due to isolation, such as the window curtain, note this in the log with the reason. 4. If you are isolated in the chapel office for more than one night consecutively, The supervisor will deliver supplies via the east door using the 2-knock countersign procedure. Accept only supplies pass through the door while it is open no more than 6 inches. Do not allow anyone to enter. 5. During isolation, you may hear sounds from other parts of the chapel: footsteps, doors, voices. Follow all standard guidelines and amendments. Do not leave the office to investigate. 6. Isolation will end when the supervisor declares the cottage secure, either via radio or in person at dawn. A security declaration will include a physical inspection of the cottage in your presence. On the 16th night, October 16th, I implemented isolation protocols from the start of my shift. I brought my duffel bag to the chapel office before sunset and locked the chapel's east door at 7:49 p.m. At 9 p.m., check-in. Acknowledged. The night was quiet. No calling, no knocking, no lights. At 2:14 a.m., I noted in the log, unable to complete window curtain procedure per isolation protocols. E.M. At dawn, Mr. Hewitt arrived and inspected the cottage. He declared it secure. I returned to the cottage at 7:03 a.m. On the 17th night, October 17th, the pattern repeated. Isolation protocols, quiet night, secure at dawn. On the 18th night, October 18th, at 10:53 p.m., I saw movement in the chapel. I was sitting at the office desk. The door was locked, the curtain closed. I heard the front door of the chapel open. Footsteps entered. They moved up the aisle and stopped at the altar. A voice called out, "Hello, is anyone here?" A woman's voice, young, uncertain. I did not answer. "I'm sorry, I see the lights. My car broke down on Cemetery Road. Can I use your phone?" I stared at the desk. "Please, I just need to call for help. It's freezing out there." At 11 p.m., check-in. Acknowledged. The voice stopped. The footsteps moved back down the aisle. The front door opened and closed. I logged it. 10:53 p.m. Voice in chapel requesting help. Did not respond per protocols. E.M. At dawn, Mr. Hewitt read the log. "Good," he said. "That's the hardest one, when they sound like they need help." What if someone really needed help? They'd go to a house, not a locked cemetery. They'd call from their cell phone. They wouldn't come inside an obviously secured building. He closed the logbook. "You're doing well, Ethan. You're following the rules. What happens if I don't?" He looked at me for a long time. "You don't want to know." On the 19th night, October 19th, at midnight exactly, all 3 floodlights went out simultaneously. I was in the chapel office. The lights outside died. The office was illuminated only by the desk lamp. I grabbed the radio. "This is Ethan Marks. All floodlights failed." 3 seconds of static. "Acknowledged. It's before 10 p.m., correct?" "No, it's midnight." Silence. 5 seconds. "Understood. Do not leave the chapel. I'm coming." The radio went silent. I sat in the dark and waited. Outside the office window, the cemetery was invisible. No light from the cottage, no light from the gates, nothing. At 12:14 a.m., I heard scraping sounds on the chapel roof. Long, dragging sounds, moving from south to north. At 12:23 a.m., I heard knocking on the east door. 3 knocks. I did not respond. At 12:31 a.m., headlights appeared on Cemetery Road. Mr. Hewitt's truck. The headlights swept through the cemetery as he drove up the access road. He parked near the chapel. I heard him walking around the building. A minute later, the floodlights came back on. All 3. 2 knocks on the office door. Pause. 2 knocks. "Who's calling?" "Hewitt." I opened the door. He was holding a toolbox. "Breaker was thrown," he said, manually. "Someone threw the breaker in the shed. Someone. Or something." He set the toolbox down. "You'll stay in the office the rest of the night." "I'm staying too. I'll be in the chapel." "You're staying." "This doesn't happen. The lights don't go out like that. Not all at once." He looked at me. "Something's different tonight." At 1 a.m., check-in, acknowledged. At 1:47 a.m., I heard the chapel's front door open. Footsteps entered. Multiple sets. Mr. Hewitt's voice called out, "Get out, now." Silence. "You're not welcome here. Get out." The footsteps stopped. "This is sanctified ground. You have no claim. Get out." The footsteps retreated. The front door closed. At 2 a.m., check-in, acknowledged. At 3:38 a.m., I heard scratching on the office door. Long, slow scratching. It continued for 9 minutes. At 5 a.m., check-in, acknowledged. At dawn, Mr. Hewitt and I walked through the cemetery together. We checked every section. Everything was normal. Headstones in rows, grass undisturbed, gates locked. We checked the shed. The breaker box was open. The main breaker was in the off position. "Did you come to the shed last night?" he asked. "No. I locked the gates at sunset and went to the chapel. I didn't go to the shed." He closed the breaker box. "The shed was locked. I opened it with my key. No sign of forced entry." "Then how?" "I don't know." He looked at the cemetery, at the rows of headstones. 23 years I've been doing this. 23 years. This is the first time they've gotten to the breakers. They're getting stronger. Or we're getting weaker. He turned to me. "You'll keep working?" "Yes. I'm changing your pay. $600 a week. And I'm going to train someone else. A second person. You'll work together." "When?" "Starting tonight." At 4:37 p.m., a blue sedan came up Cemetery Road and parked near the chapel. A man got out, mid-40s, thin, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. He looked nervous. Mr. Hewitt introduced us. "Ethan Marks, this is Paul Vickers. Paul's going to work with you." We shook hands. Paul's grip was weak. "I read the binder," Paul said. "All of it. I understand the rules." "Good," Mr. Hewitt said. "Ethan will show you the routine. You'll both stay in the chapel office tonight. 2-person protocols are in Section G. Read it now." He handed Paul a copy of the binder and left. Paul and I sat in the chapel office and read Section G together. Section G, 2-person protocols. When 2 groundskeepers are on duty, the following modifications apply. 1. Gate locking will be performed by both groundskeepers, together. Walk in pairs. Lock the gates in order, north, center, south, together. 2. Check-ins will be performed by the senior groundskeeper, longer tenure. The second groundskeeper will witness and co-sign the log entry. 3. Both groundskeepers will remain in the chapel office from sunset to sunrise. Do not separate. If one groundskeeper must use the restroom, the other will wait outside the restroom door. 4. If one groundskeeper observes an anomaly, both will log it. Discuss observations briefly and factually. Do not speculate about causes or meanings. 5. If voices call a groundskeeper by name, the other groundskeeper will confirm they also heard it. Do not let the named groundskeeper respond. Provide support through silent presence. 6. If one groundskeeper exhibits unusual behavior, speaking to empty air, attempting to leave, ignoring protocols, the other will physically restrain them if necessary and radio the supervisor immediately with the phrase "Code White." 7. Trust your partner. Trust the rules. At 5:47 p.m., Paul and I locked the gates together. North, center, south. He was quiet, jumpy. When we walked back to the chapel, he kept looking over his shoulder. At 7:31 p.m., the floodlights activated. At 9 p.m., I made the check-in. Paul witnessed and co-signed PV. At 9:52 p.m., we heard calling from outside. "Ethan." Paul looked at me. I shook my head. "Ethan Marks." Paul whispered, "Should we?" "No," I said quietly. "We don't respond." The calling continued for 14 minutes. Paul sat rigid in his chair, staring at the desk. When it stopped, he let out a breath. "Jesus," he said. "Log it," I said. He wrote 9:52 p.m., calling from outside. Ethan's name, ignored per protocols. Duration, 14 minutes. EM, PV. At 10 p.m., check-in, acknowledged. At 10:37 p.m., we heard Paul's name. "Paul Vickers." He went pale. "Paul, it's Claire. I need to talk to you." His wife's voice. I could see it in his face. "Paul, please. The kids are asking about you." His hand moved toward the door handle. I grabbed his wrist. "No," I said. "That's Claire. That's my wife's voice. It's not. Look at me. It's not her." "Paul, why won't you answer me?" He tried to pull away. I held his wrist. "Listen to me," I said. "The rules keep us safe. You read the binder. You know what to do." The voice continued. "I drove all the way up here. Don't ignore me, Paul." Tears ran down his face, but he stayed in the chair. The voice stopped at 10:51 p.m. 14 minutes. Paul logged it with shaking hands. At 11 p.m., check-in. Acknowledged. At midnight, we heard the chapel's front door open. Footsteps entered. Paul stood. "Someone's inside." "Sit down," I said. "But sit down." He sat. The footsteps moved through the chapel. We heard them circle the space, passing the north side, the south side, approaching the office door. They stopped outside. Paul was breathing fast, shallow breaths. I put my hand on his shoulder. The door handle turned. Paul grabbed my arm. "It's opening." "The bolt is secure," I said. "Trust the rules." The handle turned back and forth.